They changed Grandma's will the night before, so I walked in with the codicil and the court stenographer. My name is Tamsin Wells, and on the morning my grandmother's legacy was supposed to be carved into stone, I woke before the sun and stared at the ceiling fan as if it could read me the future. The blades kept circling in slow, patient loops, the same way probate grinds, steady, indifferent, inevitable. I lay there counting them, counting breaths, counting every moment I hadn't said what I needed to say while my grandmother was still alive. Then I stopped counting and got up. The coffee maker clicked to life like a small machine gun. I poured grounds the way my grandmother taught me. 2 heaping spoons and 1 for the pot, because guests might arrive. And the smell found my nerves before the caffeine did. On the counter, my leather portfolio waited. I had kissed the clasp shut the night before as if it were skin. Inside were 3 things that mattered more than my heart rate. A sealed manila envelope with dark red wax, a printed affidavit with 2 blue ink signatures and a notary seal like a metallic sunburst, and a business card paper-clipped to a check. The card read, Helena Price, RPR, CRR, Registered Court Reporter. Below her name was a promise written in the neutral confidence of professionals who are never surprised. Verbatim record. On and off the record at your direction. I had called Helena the previous afternoon, voice shaking, hands cold despite the July heat, and told her I needed her to sit in on a will reading at 10 o'clock sharp on Beacon Street. She didn't ask who I was or why a family meeting would need a transcript. She asked what room, what building, whether there would be a conference table or a smaller space, because it mattered where she could set up the steno machine and how close she'd be to the people speaking. I told her it would be in the Whitman and Lyle conference room overlooking the Back Bay rooftops, the one with the oil painting of a schooner fighting a storm. She said she knew the room. I'll be there 15 minutes early, she said. If anyone objects, you'll need to state on the record that I'm present at your request. What if the attorney says no? She paused just long enough to let the question sit like a porcelain cup on a too-high shelf. He can ask me to leave. He can't stop you from audio recording in a private, non-court setting unless there's a policy or a statute that you choose to honor. But people behave better in front of a steno machine. Old reflex. People behave better when watched, I thought. Or worse, if they believe they won't be held to it later. I packed the portfolio, closed the latch, and opened the window. Boston's morning was a wet whisper, the kind that curls at the edges of the city and smells faintly of salt and brick dust. A street cleaner hissed by. On the corner, a kid in a reflective vest loaded crates of pastries into a cafe. I could have walked there, bought something sugared and warm, but my stomach felt like folded tin. On my dining table, beside a ficus that hadn't decided whether to live or die, sat the other object I'd collected for this morning. A voicemail transcribed on paper, words flagged in yellow like crime scene tape. This is Inez from the hospice. I shouldn't be calling, but I was there last night. Ms. Mallory was on the nighttime dose when the visitors came. They said they needed to talk about papers. She was groggy. I can't. Just wanted you to know. I'm sorry for your loss. Groggy. Nighttime dose. Visitors. My grandmother was Greta Mallory, a woman whose wrist bone still looked elegant under hospital tape. She taught me to pay attention to verbs because they do the work in sentences. Groggy is not a verb, but it might as well be. It does the work of softening a mind just enough for someone else to move it around. At 8:10, a silver sedan pulled up in front of my building. Helena stepped out in a navy sheath dress, the kind of neutral armor that makes people underestimate you. She wheeled a small case behind her. Her hair was pinned in a way that looked like it could withstand cross-examination. Miss Wells, she said, holding out her hand. We'll get a clean record. Do you want timestamps every 5 minutes? Every 3, please. She nodded, as if she approved of my insistence on detail, and we rode downtown while I coached my breath into not galloping. The city unscrolled around us, Charles River flashing like solder, cyclists threading traffic like needles. When we reached Beacon Street, Whitman and Lyle's facade looked like money trying not to brag. Limestone, brass, windows that reflected the sky in expensive squares. Inside, the receptionist recognized my name and softened. "Miss Wells, I'm sorry about your grandmother." And that alone made me almost cry because everyone else had said it like punctuation. But she said it like a sentence, with a verb and a subject. I am sorry. "The conference room is ready. Would you like water? Tea?" "Water, please." And I watched because today, watching was a job. She poured from a glass bottle and rolled the condensation with a napkin before setting it down. She turned the label inward, a small courtesy that said this office understood optics. I understood them too. I'd worked in venture capital long enough to know that most battles are decided before anyone picks up a sword. They're decided when someone picks the room, the chairs, the order of speaking.
Helena sat up near the short end of the table, to the side where the sun wouldn't glare across her keys. She tested, check, check, her audio backup with the casual professionalism of a pilot flicking switches before takeoff. The machine sat like an animal that had evolved to eat words. At 9:55, my Aunt Meredith arrived on a snow of perfume, pale pink suit, and pearls that were real enough to make a small sound when they knocked together. Meredith pretended not to see Helena. My Uncle Graham followed, tall enough to carry his own weather system, sleeves rolled with the purposefulness of a man who lifts nothing heavier than other people's expectations. Cousin Trevor drifted in, all beard and a t-shirt that said a startup name he hoped you'd ask about. A woman I didn't know took a seat at the far end. She had the tidy, helpful hair of someone who had filed other people's taxes for 20 years. Finally, Attorney Dalton entered. He was a Whitman partner who had replaced Grandma's longtime counsel 2 months ago, a quiet coup I was still angry at myself for missing when it happened. He pulled a folder from his briefcase, set it down with care like a pastry he didn't want to bruise, and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he said, choosing a chair that put the oil painting of the storm at his back. "As you know, Ms. Mallory passed away 3 nights ago. I'm sorry for your loss." His eyes skipped over me the way people skip a stone they aren't sure will float. I am here to read her last will and testament, a new will executed last night. The sentence clicked shut like a lid. I could feel Helena's fingers shift, ready. Meredith placed her hand over her pearls like an actress about to receive applause. "At last," she said, soft enough to read as reverence, loud enough to read as, "finally, order restored." "I have an objection before we begin," I said, and the word objection surprised us all, including me. At the very least, I want it noted who is in the room, what time we started, and that we have a certified court reporter present at my request. Dalton blinked. "This is not a court proceeding, Ms. Wells." "I'm aware," I said, "which is why the presence of a reporter is even more important. We all want accuracy, don't we?" I shifted my gaze to Helena. "Off the record for a moment. Are you ready?" Helena looked up, her hands quiet on the keys. She said, "On your direction." "On the record," I said. "Time is 10:01 a.m., Friday, July 18th. Present are Attorney Martin Dalton, Ms. Meredith Caldwell, Mr. Graham Wells, Mr. Trevor Caldwell, Ms. Tamsin Wells, one administrative assistant I do not know, and Ms. Helena Price, registered court reporter." Dalton's mouth flattened into something he might call a smile if you couldn't see it. He said, "The firm's policy is to restrict recording devices. We are making an exception to permit Miss Price to remain in the interest of—" He hesitated. "Transparency." That small stutter told me exactly how he liked his days, without surprises. I held his gaze the way you hold a heavy door open with your shoulder. "Proceed," I said. He unfolded the new will and began to read. The words were dry as June grass. Bequests to charity were all funneled through a new family foundation with my aunt as managing director. The house in Chatham to Meredith, the paintings at the townhouse to Graham to be sold and proceeds distributed to grandchildren in equal shares, which meant Trevor, who had neither the patience to dust a frame nor the discipline to wait for a wire. A few minor bequests to staff. And then the clause that hit me in the ribs. To my granddaughter, Tamsin, I leave her jade ring, condition precedent that she resign any claim to the residuary estate. The jade ring had been mine since I was 6, since the afternoon Grandma slid it down my finger and said, "This is cold now, it'll warm with you." I wore it on a chain because adult knuckles refused childhood circles. Now it was being offered back to me as a consolation prize, as if I could be appeased with the shape of something instead of its meaning. Attorney Dalton, I said, before he could roll into the residuary clause like a foregone conclusion, state for the record the time of execution of this instrument. Meredith laughed a little. This isn't a deposition, Tamsin. Then it should be easy to answer, I said, and my voice was steady because I knew that below steady was the tremor of something like grief and something like rage, and I didn't have time for either. Dalton glanced at the document in his hand, though he already knew. 9:30 p.m. last night. And the witnesses? 2 nurses from the hospice were present. Names. He named them. One was Inez. The sound of her name made the room tilt and steady again, like a boat finding the next wave. And Ms. Mallory's attending physician. Was he present? Did he sign a contemporaneous capacity statement? I'm not obliged to answer medical questions, Ms. Wells. You are obliged to answer whether you satisfied the formalities of execution under Massachusetts law, which include capacity. Dalton's smile became an ice shelf that would calve later. We satisfied all formalities. If you have concerns, the proper venue is the court. I agree, I said, which is why I want you to read into the record the exact medication schedule last night. Meredith's pearls clicked again. Really, Tamsin? Helena's machine kept eating words. Dalton set down the well. We are here out of respect for your grandmother's wishes, Ms. Wells, not to engage in accuracy, I said. Respect requires accuracy. I reached into my portfolio and ran my thumb on the red wax. Respect also requires honoring her hand when she was clear and careful and looking me in the eye. Trevor shifted, bored. Is there a point? I lifted the envelope and placed it on the hardwood surface in front of Dalton. Even the receptionist's water seemed to listen. What is that? Meredith asked, voice soft, teeth sharp. An instrument executed by Ms. Mallory 2 months ago, a codicil to her will, witnessed by her neighbor of 30 years and her former nurse before she entered hospice, self-proving affidavit attached, original notarized. I have the original. This is an attorney's certified copy. The original is in a safe deposit box at State Street Bank. Graham made a sound like a chair dragged across tile. You forged? Finish that sentence, and we can go downstairs together and meet the detective who will take your statement. It wasn't a bluff. In my bag was a file with chain of custody documents and a text from a friend at the district attorney's office that read simply, "If they push, push back. I've got you."
Dalton didn't touch the envelope. This codicil, if it exists, postdates which instrument? The 2014 will, I said. The one Miss Mallory executed with your predecessor, Mr. Lyle, when she was healthy and had a taste for very dry martinis. The administrative assistant spoke for the first time, almost apologetic. Mr. Lyle retired 2 months ago, she said. Mr. Dalton took over Miss Mallory's matters. I know, I said. I also know he recommended Meredith's foundation be named as the primary charitable vehicle. I looked at Helena's moving fingers. Read that back. She did, voice even, words marching back at us with no way to dodge them. Recommended, Meredith's foundation, primary charitable vehicle. Meredith's mouth tightened. You always were dramatic, she said. Greta wanted family harmony. She wanted honesty, I said, and she wrote it down while she still had full control of her verbs. I slid the envelope closer to Dalton. Read it. He broke the wax with his thumb, he scanned, and I watched his eyes move the way people's eyes move when the ground under them changes slope. He took a breath, the kind you reserve for when you must make your face do something different than your heart. For the record, this appears to be a codicil, signed 2 months ago, revoking Article 7, reinstating Miss Wells as co-executor with the firm, directing that the Chatham property be held in trust for the girls' maritime scholarship, and, he paused,
specifying that any person serving as agent under a power of attorney shall not serve as a director of any charitable foundation funded by this estate. He looked up, briefly, at Meredith. Graham folded his arms. This proves nothing. Anyone can scribble words. Which is why, I said, keeping my gaze at Dalton, there's a self-proving affidavit attached, signed by both witnesses and notarized in blue ink so you can see it isn't a copy of a copy. And because I prefer to save everyone the cost of watching you pretend not to understand, there's also a video. I brought out my phone, placed it face down beside the envelope. You'll have the original SD card as soon as we file. Dalton's eyes flicked to the phone and away, like a man glancing at a knife and choosing not to touch it. Trevor snorted. "This is all very Netflix," he said. "Grandma changed her mind. People die. Things change." People die, but their last lucid choices deserve oxygen. I turned to Dalton. Now, continuing with your reading, read the residuary clause you were so eager to reach. He lifted the new will, but his voice had lost that courthouse cadence lawyers practice in mirrors. Residuary estate to the Meredith Caldwell Foundation, to be directed to programs as the director sees fit. He cleared his throat. No contest clause to disinherit any beneficiary who challenges this instrument. He paused, the pause that pretends to be compassion and is really a calculation of whether anything matters but timing. I let silence pool until it had weight. For the record, I am not challenging the 2014 will. I am presenting a properly executed codicil that modifies it. If anything, I am challenging this new instrument executed last night after sedation for lack of capacity and undue influence. Meredith's chair creaked. How dare you? How did you? And my voice broke on the did the way a rope breaks after weather and weight. How did you walk into that room with morphine dripping and put a pen in her hand? The administrative assistant stood. I'll get Mr. Dalton another copy of... Sit down, Nora, Dalton said gently, and then to me. Allegations of undue influence are serious. We can address them in court. I've prepared for that, I said. I slid a slim folder across to him, a petition to preserve estate assets, requesting a temporary restraining order against transfers from accounts designated in Exhibit B. The judge's clerk knows to expect a filing by noon. I waited to bring it because I prefer sunlight to subpoenas. Graham leaned forward. Yous think you're clever, but that will is the last word. Not while she still had words, I said, touching the codicil with 2 fingers. And she did, Graham. She did. 2 months ago, on her porch, with lemon cake cooling and the dog asleep at her feet, she said, "You'll make sure the scholarship happens, yes?" And I said, "I will." And she said, "Then take the pen, darling. Let's put verbs to it." The room went quiet, and that way it goes quiet when the one thing you can't refute isn't a fact, but a memory that smells like cake. Dalton looked at his watch and then at Helena. "Off the record?" I didn't answer. Helena's hands hovered. "If you want it off the record, say it out loud, Attorney Dalton," I said. He sighed. "On the record. I propose a 15-minute recess." "No," I said. "We finish the reading. Then we can recess." He set his jaw. "Very well. The new will concludes here." He tapped the page and closed the folder with a quiet finality that wasn't final at all. "We will, of course, need to verify the authenticity of your codicil, Ms. Wells. I will reach out to the witnesses." "They're expecting your call," I said. "Ines will also be expecting yours." Meredith's head snapped. "You took advantage of a nurse." "No," I said. "You took advantage of a patient." The receptionist buzzed the conference phone, the sound like a hammer hitting a chime. Dalton pressed the button. "Yes?" "There's a courier here with an envelope for Ms. Wells. He says it's urgent and that it's been clocked by the courthouse." "Send him in," I said, though my pulse had started a new career. A young man in a bike helmet entered with a yellow envelope and the scuffed shoes of someone who runs for a living. He looked around at the room, at Helena's machine, at the pearls. He handed me the envelope. He said, "Filed and signed. The clerk said to tell you, good luck." Dalton's brows knit. "What did you file?" "Nothing you need to fear if you believe in transparency," I said, sliding the envelope toward him. He opened it, scanned, and his mouth went neutral. A temporary restraining order, time-stamped 10:23 a.m., preserving the status quo and enjoining any transfer from designated accounts. Graham exhaled a syllable not usually spoken in law offices. Dalton tapped a knuckle against the restraining order, calculating anew. He looked at Helena in a way that suggested he'd rather her machine were a fern. On the record, Whitman and Lyle will comply with any lawful order of the court. He turned to me. But understand, Ms. Wells, if your codicil is invalid, you will have done nothing but delay. I can live with delay. I cannot live with theft. Meredith stood. I won't be ambushed in a room with a machine typing my grief. But yet, she didn't leave. Her hand worried her pearls into a small sound. Greta wanted me to have the house. She said it herself. She did, I said softly, because the truth is rarely one color. She said the house made you feel safe, which is why the codicil proposes the trust lets you live there until you don't want to. Then the proceeds fund girls who want to learn to sail. She wanted both, Mare. Meredith blinked at the softening of her name. For a second, she was just my aunt in the kitchen teaching me to pinch pie crust without tearing it. Then her face closed. You're manipulating me. I'm remembering you. And her. Dalton stacked papers the way surgeons stack instruments when the bleeding has slowed, but no one can go home yet. He said, "We will reconvene after lunch to discuss next steps." We'll reconvene now, and I drew in breath so deep it hurt. From the portfolio, I pulled a small black flash drive and set it beside Helena's machine. For the record, I said, this drive contains the video of Miss Mallory executing the codicil, dated 2 months ago. The original resides with the notary. I am willing to play it now. Dalton looked at the oil painting of the storm. I wondered if he saw the ship at all, or just the price of the frame. There is no need to play. There is, I said, because I want you to hear her voice the way it sounded when it still had lemon cake in it. Trevor rolled his eyes. Good God. I plugged the drive into the conference room screen. The screen awoke. Helena's fingers stilled. Meredith's pearls were briefly the only moving thing in the room. I selected the file. Greta Cody 0425. On the screen, my grandmother appeared in a blue sweater. Her hair was thinner but brushed. Her eyes were clear. She looked at me, through me, really, and said, "All right, let's make sure the verbs are doing the work." I heard Meredith swallow. Graham's jaw flexed. Dalton's hand, resting on the table, flattened. On the video, my grandmother read each line of the codicil, slow and careful. She asked the witnesses to read it too. She asked the notary to state her name and commission number. Then she looked at the camera and said, "I am Greta Mallory. No one is making me do this. I am signing because it is what I think most clearly when I wake in the morning and what I still think when I close my eyes at night." She set the pen to paper, and I swear the air in the conference room changed the way air changes before rain. When the video ended, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint whir of the AC and Helena's keys breathing, recording the silence because silence is a part of the record too. Dalton cleared his throat. "Very well," he said. "We will..." The conference room door opened before he could finish. Ines from the hospice stepped in. She wore pale green scrubs under a gray sweater, and the look of someone who had decided to tell the truth even if it cost her dinner. She clutched her own envelope, the way people clutch letters that are both weapon and shield. "I'm sorry," she said to the room, to me. "I didn't know if they'd let me up. I brought my notes." She lifted the envelope. "From last night." Meredith went white. "How did you..." "Ines," I said, and my voice nearly failed on the I. "Thank you for coming." Dalton stood. "Ms. Ines, this is exactly the time. On the record." I turned to Helena. "On the record, please." Helena's fingers settled like wings against keys. Ines looked at me, then at Meredith, then at Dalton. She took a breath. "Last night, Miss Mallory was on the 9:30 morphine. She was warm and sleepy. The visitors asked for her to sign some pages.
I asked them to wait. They said it was urgent. You said it was prayers. Meredith's mouth opened, then closed. Enos! Dalton said softly, warning disguised as care. There are confidentiality policies. I know. I also know what undue influence looks like. We have a training on it every year, and we're supposed to report. Graham rubbed his forehead like he could erase the last minute by friction. This is a circus. No, it's a record, I said. I looked at Helena. State the time, please. 10:51 a.m., Helena said. Inez held out her notes, a copy of the hospice log with the dose schedule, and a half-page she'd written in neat block letters. Dalton didn't take them. I did. The page was simple. Patient, Mallory, Greta, visitors at 9:15 p.m. Spoke of prayers. Patient drowsy post-dose. Pen placed in hand. RN interjected to suggest waiting. Visitors insisted. RN left the room to notify supervisor. Visitors remained. Returned 9:34 p.m. Signatures on papers. Thank you, I said, and my voice was a fraction softer than it had been all morning. Would you be willing to attest to this in court? Enos looked like a person thinking about rent and justice at the same time. Then she nodded. Yes, she said. Dalton sat, slow, without looking at Meredith. He said, We will need to review all documents. Whitman and Lyle will hold the night instrument in escrow pending authenticity and capacity review. Let's start with authenticity, because I also want to know who drafted it, and I want that person on the record. Dalton's cheek jumped. That will be between client and counsel, not when the client was medicated, not when a foundation director stood to benefit. Meredith pushed her chair back, wood on wood. This is persecution. This is protection. I reached for the portfolio again, the last item I had brought because I hadn't decided whether to use it today. It was a letter, handwritten, the paper thick like cake, addressed to me in grandmother's naughty script. I placed it beside the codicil. She wrote this the same day. Meredith's hands opened and closed. You always wanted to be the favorite. I wanted to be the one she could count on. Those are not the same thing. Dalton rubbed his temples. We need order, he said. We'll adjourn for lunch. Before you do, I said, leaning forward because the cliff was coming and I had to make sure we stepped onto it, not off it. I want a commitment that no account related to this estate will be moved today. The TRO covers most, but not the ones you didn't disclose because you thought they were clever. His eyes flicked, a tell he didn't mean to show. He reached for the restraining order again, as if it might read differently now. Whitman will comply with the order, which was not the thing I asked. The order and my request. The room held its breath. Outside, a siren moved down Beacon toward the park, the sound thinning as it passed. Inside, the air tightened. Dalton opened his mouth. Objection!
Miss Halden, Judge Aarons called, striving for the sort of calm his clerk wrote into minutes. Please, bring the child to the courthouse. We will do this without savagery. Riva did not look up. She spoke into the small, sweet-smelling space under her own chin. Nothing that happened here was savage until a man tried to count us. Eleanor Quade's door opened. She stood in her doorway without stepping into the rain, a dark ribbon in a dark dress. She did not call to Riva. She called to the state. Trooper, she said, and her voice was metal softened by heat. Stand down. The trooper who had Fenn's collar in his fist hesitated. He did not take orders from women in towns with names he had not heard until the circuit posted them. But he took orders from money. He knew the weight of that voice. He looked at the judge, saw in the set of his mouth that no one was willing to bleed for the uglier version of this moment, and released Fenn's coat with a shove that was both apology and insult. Courthouse, Aarons said. 9 o'clock was the hour. We're late. We'll hear counsel. We'll take witness. His gaze cut to Brogan. And we will do it under the roof of law, not under clouds. Fenn sat up, spat red into the cobbles, and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. The blood made a rude, defiant slash there,
a flag nobody had ordered, and that still flew. He stood, slow, and Riva felt the fact of him rise through her body like a ladder rung you are grateful to find with your foot before you fall. He looked toward her, not to check the child, she held the child, but to check the woman. She lifted her chin once, and that was enough. Move, May said, not to the men, but to the people who loved Riva and also to her fear. We'll walk, we'll count every step. If anyone touches her without asking, I'll take that hand home in a jar like a curiosity. The square, contrary, human, laughed, and the laugh made the air human again. The troopers mounted because they needed to look like cavalry even in a town with no charge worth making. The prison wagon creaked like a sermon-moving house. The judge swept back up his steps with a flurry of papers that pretended to be purpose. Sheriff Brogan wiped his sleeve where soup or blood had made a mark and held his badge like a coin he meant to spend today if he had to. They went. Riva walked with her child. Fen walked half a step to her left and half a step back where he could meet any hand that mistook the curve of her body for an invitation. May walked on Riva's other side, broader than she had any right to be, her apron like a banner it would be a mistake to snatch. Dorothea, Beata, and Elsie made a moving corner at their backs. Lydia had her broom, Mill Baines had his cane. Fell the clerk came trotting with his ledger under his arm, mother-in-law towing him by the ear of his intentions. The courthouse swallowed them and found it had a lump in its throat. The hall smelled of sawdust and old paper and pipe. The ceiling colored the air the way bad milk colors tea. The benches in the chamber were already thick with bodies. Men leaned forward, women set their elbows wide, children dangled their legs and discovered reverence as a place to hold still. Riva saw the cracks in the plaster and the worn place on the rail where hands had learned to worry instead of do. She thought, if we breathe too hard, this building will blow down like a drunk who has leaned too long against the idea he is upright. Sit, May said, carefully. She arranged Riva and the baby with the same brisk tenderness she had used in the barn, as if the law's walls were just another kind of stall, and good midwifery would have to do where justice might fail. Judge Aarons took the bench with ceremony that felt tired and angry with itself. He banged his gavel, which had not had reason to mean anything for so long. It had learned to flirt. It tried for authority and landed at theatrical. This proceeding, and the word looked proud of its own gait, concerns the welfare of an infant called Finnell Halden. The council has petitioned for temporary guardianship, pending a more exhaustive inquiry into the mother's circumstances and the child's prospects. The Quaid estate has offered to support such guardianship. We will hear from the solicitor, from interested parties, and, his mouth tightened, from such witnesses as have gathered in a forum that resembles a stampede. He glanced at the door. The troopers took up posts that made their carbines into punctuation. Advocate Birch stood and smoothed his city coat. He had dried in the time it took to walk here, and the drying had made him crisp and false. He recited a list with the confidence of men who believe lists are magic. Vacancy of father, vacancy of means, vacancy of proof, vacancy of propriety. Each vacancy had a number. Each number wore a hat that said official. Riva watched his mouth move and felt the old anger blot out fear the way a summer storm blots out a sickly sun. Vacancy. As if the work she had done in the last 12 hours didn't count because it had not been written down with ink that claimed to be permanent. As if her full arms were emptiness because they were not a ledger entry. She looked at Finnell's eyelashes and counted them instead of Birch's points. His breath tickled her collarbone. His jaw found that small, stubborn rhythm again, the one that sounded like a drum teaching your heart a better song. Miss Halden, Birch said at last, turning with the air of a man graciously letting a child speak before the adults ended the discussion. You wish to say something? Riva stood, not fast, her body was not interested in haste now, but sure. The room shifted in its seat, a boat redistributing weight. I worked for my bread, she said. I paid for my room. I kept to myself. I asked nothing of this town but what I could afford, and I gave more than I was asked when I could spare it. This morning, I gave my body to this child. I am not a vacancy. I am, quite plainly, full. Someone clapped and stopped, embarrassed. Another person hissed and then remembered and turned it into a whisper of, "Here." May crossed her arms and made a pillar of herself, proud and fierce and not blinking. Fen moved not at all and still managed to look as if he had shifted closer to Riva's voice. "And the father?" Birch smiled in a way he hoped looked paternal. Riva felt the old shame glance off her and shatter somewhere behind her, where women who had survived worse grounded under their heels without looking down. "Absent," she said. "Unnecessary." Gasps. The room loved a word thrown like a horseshoe into a circle. Judge Aarons lifted his gavel, then lowered it without striking. He had enough sense to know that if he hit the wood after that word, it would sound like approval, and there would be hell to pay at supper. "Name him," Elder Pike demanded from the side where the council had arranged themselves like a window nobody had washed. "Name the man who put you in this fix and left." Riva's eyes slid over him and did not stop. "My son's name is Finnell. That is the name that matters." Her mouth softened, and it did not weaken her, it completed her. "If you want to know the name of the person who stayed, it's the one you will all remember, yourselves if you allow us to leave here together." A noise rolled the benches, not applause, not outrage, something heavier, the sound a river makes when it changes course and does not ask permission of the farmers. Birch color shifted toward pomegranate. He glanced at Eleanora Quaid, who was a figure of disciplined stillness 2 rows back, her dark dress a night in daylight, her gloves once more on her lap, as if the hands inside had learned to fold themselves. "We will have witnesses," the judge said, seeking the safety of sequence. "Miss Kettle."
"I prefer trains to roller coasters," she said, "but I never say no to a transcript with plot." We took the elevator down with Nora, the assistant, who stared at the floor numbers like they might answer for the day. In the lobby, Abigail from the DA's office was waiting with a man in a navy suit who introduced himself as Bank Compliance. He had the pale look of someone who lives inside fluorescent light. We received an instruction at 9:58 a.m. to initiate a wire from an account ending in 7731 titled Mallory Family Charitable, he said, consulting a folder and flipping a page like a wing. "It failed at 10:09 a.m. after your orders swept across our system. This affidavit memorializes those times." He handed me the affidavit, and I recognized the judicious font that makes bankers feel safe. "We'll file as needed." "Who initiated the wire?" I asked. He pointed at a line. "Authorized by Caldwell, Meredith, Director." He didn't look at my aunt when he said it, which was a kindness I would not have afforded her. Meredith's breath came out in a shape that looked like a word and wasn't. "It was payroll," she said, "for the foundation. It runs on Fridays." "Then the work will get done Monday," I said. "Today the work is telling the truth." Abigail slipped me a look that said, "You're doing fine." Out loud she said nothing. Smart people don't add color when the facts are loud. We walked the few blocks to the courthouse as if the sidewalks themselves wanted to listen. The July sun had settled into certainty. Pigeons held a city conference by the curb. At the entrance, a security guard greeted Helena like they'd met many versions of this day. Perhaps they had. We went through metal detectors that beeped for belt buckles and intentions. Suffolk Probate and Family Court on New Chardon had the bad floors of an old school and the brisk competence of a place where people bring their families to be dismantled or put back together. We found the clerk's window where Abby had promised to grease the skids. Paper stamped, numbers assigned. The docket coughs up a time. 1:30 p.m., courtroom 2. Jonah arrived at 12:41 like a man who obeys clocks because he respects stories. He hugged me quickly, half friend, half counsel, and switched immediately into the version of himself that knows when to speak and when to let silence impose its own order. "We'll move to sequester the 930 instrument and to admit the 2014 will with Codicil to probate on a temporary basis. Judge Crane hates games." Helena whispered, "Good," to no one, to everyone, and checked her machine again. She'd brought a portable battery the size of a paperback that looked like it could write a novel if you fed it people. We waited on the bench outside courtroom 2 with other families who were not us and were exactly us, their faces a mix of grief and calculation. Meredith sat across from me with her hands in her lap like she was auditioning for a role where grief wears good jewelry. Ground haste, Trevor tried to make eye contact with a woman, failed, and pretended he hadn't tried.
At 1:29, the clerk opened the door. Mallory Estate, she called, and our names moved as if someone had tugged a string. Inside, the room was wood and gravitas. Judge Crane took the bench with a face that made you want to sharpen your verbs. Jonah addressed the court with the economy of a man who doesn't use 3 words when one is the exact size. Your Honor, we move to maintain the status quo and to sequester an instrument purportedly executed at 9:30 p.m. last night, under circumstances suggesting lack of capacity and undue influence. We further present a self-proving codicil executed 2 months ago, video and affidavit attached, and seek its provisional admission in conjunction with the 2014 will pending an evidentiary hearing. Dalton stood to respond. Your Honor, the decedent executed a new will last night reflecting her updated wishes. We deny any impropriety. We welcome a full hearing. In the interim, the Foundation's operations stop there, Judge Crane said. Not unkind, not kind. If there is a dispute regarding capacity and execution, there will be no operations until I've heard evidence. Status quo is status quo. Dalton inclined his head, pretending he'd meant to concede. Ms. Wells, the judge said, looking at me with the particular patience of someone who spots the person who carried the heat into the building. Do you have the original codicil? In a bank box, Your Honor. We're scheduled at 12:30. I caught myself. Time had already stepped. We were scheduled at 12:30 today to retrieve it for inspection by counsel under joint chain of custody. Crane nodded once. Good. Bring it to my clerk by close of business with a cover letter copied to opposing counsel. The video? We can play it, Jonah said. Play it, Crane said. A bailiff dimmed the lights like a reluctant usher. On the small screen, my grandmother's face brought the room into one woman's careful world. She read the words she had decided line by line, and when she said, "No one is making me do this," Judge Crane's expression did something you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking right at it. It registered that the sentence was exactly the shape a person makes when she is alone with her mind and proud of it. Crane lifted a hand. The bailiff stopped the video, the room returning to itself like a story returning to a book as a child falls asleep. Thank you, the judge said. We will set an evidentiary hearing for Tuesday at 9 a.m. In the interim, I order the following. 1. No distribution or transfer of any estate or foundation assets. 2. The instrument dated last night to be deposited this afternoon with the clerk under seal. 3. Counsel to exchange witness lists and exhibits by close of business Monday. 4. Parties to refrain from speaking to any hospice staff about their conduct last night except through counsel. He turned to Enos, who sat in the back with her hands folded the way you fold them when you want to be brave and small at once. Thank you for being here, he said. Your employer will receive a letter reminding them of their duty not to retaliate against any employee who testifies to what they saw. Enos's eyes filled and steadied. I swallowed twice to convince my voice to stay my friend. Anything further? Crane asked. Jonah nodded toward me. Your Honor, one more thing, I said. The Meredith Caldwell Foundation directs its funds under the control of Miss Caldwell. The codicil stipulates that any person serving under a power of attorney may not serve as a director of a charitable entity funded by this estate. We respectfully request that the court appoint a temporary independent trustee to oversee any charitable activities pending resolution.
Helena sat up near the short end of the table, to the side where the sun wouldn't glare across her keys. She tested, check, check, her audio backup with the casual professionalism of a pilot flicking switches before takeoff. The machine sat like an animal that had evolved to eat words. At 9:55, my Aunt Meredith arrived on a snow of perfume, pale pink suit, and pearls that were real enough to make a small sound when they knocked together. Meredith pretended not to see Helena. My Uncle Graham followed, tall enough to carry his own weather system, sleeves rolled with the purposefulness of a man who lifts nothing heavier than other people's expectations. Cousin Trevor drifted in, all beard and a t-shirt that said a startup name he hoped you'd ask about. A woman I didn't know took a seat at the far end. She had the tidy, helpful hair of someone who had filed other people's taxes for 20 years. Finally, Attorney Dalton entered. He was a Whitman partner who had replaced Grandma's longtime counsel 2 months ago, a quiet coup I was still angry at myself for missing when it happened. He pulled a folder from his briefcase, set it down with care like a pastry he didn't want to bruise, and cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on short notice, he said, choosing a chair that put the oil painting of the storm at his back. As you know, Ms. Mallory passed away 3 nights ago. I'm sorry for your loss. His eyes skipped over me the way people skip a stone they aren't sure will float. I am here to read her last will and testament, a new will executed last night. The sentence clicked shut like a lid. I could feel Helena's fingers shift, ready. Meredith placed her hand over her pearls like an actress about to receive applause. At last, she said, soft enough to read as reverence, loud enough to read as, finally, order restored. I have an objection before we begin, I said, and the word objection surprised us all, including me. At the very least, I want it noted who is in the room, what time we started, and that we have a certified court reporter present at my request. Dalton blinked. This is not a court proceeding, Ms. Wells. I'm aware, I said, which is why the presence of a reporter is even more important. We all want accuracy, don't we? I shifted my gaze to Helena. Off the record for a moment. Are you ready? Helena looked up, her hands quiet on the keys. She said, on your direction. On the record, I said. Time is 10:01 a.m., Friday, July 18th. Present are Attorney Martin Dalton, Ms. Meredith Caldwell, Mr. Graham Wells, Mr. Trevor Caldwell, Ms. Tamsin Wells, one administrative assistant I do not know, and Ms. Helena Price, registered court reporter. Dalton's mouth flattened into something he might call a smile if you couldn't see it. He said, the firm's policy is to restrict recording devices. We are making an exception to permit Miss Price to remain in the interest of... He hesitated. Transparency. That small stutter told me exactly how he liked his days, without surprises. I held his gaze the way you hold a heavy door open with your shoulder. Proceed, I said. He unfolded the new will and began to read. The words were dry as June grass. Bequests to charity were all funneled through a new family foundation with my aunt as managing director. The house in Chatham to Meredith, the paintings at the townhouse to Graham to be sold and proceeds distributed to grandchildren in equal shares, which meant Trevor, who had neither the patience to dust a frame nor the discipline to wait for a wire. A few minor bequests to staff, and then the clause that hit me in the ribs. To my granddaughter, Tamsin, I leave her jade ring, condition precedent that she resign any claim to the residuary estate. The jade ring had been mine since I was 6, since the afternoon Grandma slid it down my finger and said, "This is cold now, it'll warm with you." I wore it on a chain because adult knuckles refused childhood circles. Now it was being offered back to me as a consolation prize, as if I could be appeased with the shape of something instead of its meaning. Attorney Dalton, I said, before he could roll into the residuary clause like a foregone conclusion, state for the record the time of execution of this instrument. Meredith laughed a little. This isn't a deposition, Tamsin. Then it should be easy to answer, I said, and my voice was steady because I knew that below steady was the tremor of something like grief and something like rage, and I didn't have time for either. Dalton glanced at the document in his hand, though he already knew. 9:30 p.m. last night. And the witnesses? 2 nurses from the hospice were present. Names. He named them. One was Inez. The sound of her name made the room tilt and steady again, like a boat finding the next wave. And Ms. Mallory's attending physician. Was he present? Did he sign a contemporaneous capacity statement? I'm not obliged to answer medical questions, Ms. Wells. You are obliged to answer whether you satisfied the formalities of execution under Massachusetts law, which include capacity. Dalton's smile became an ice shelf that would calve later. We satisfied all formalities. If you have concerns, the proper venue is the court. I agree, I said, which is why I want you to read into the record the exact medication schedule last night. Meredith's pearls clicked again. Really, Tamsin? Helena's machine kept eating words. Dalton set down the well. We are here out of respect for your grandmother's wishes, Ms. Wells, not to engage in accuracy, I said. Respect requires accuracy. I reached into my portfolio and ran my thumb on the red wax. Respect also requires honoring her hand when she was clear and careful and looking me in the eye. Trevor shifted, bored. Is there a point? I lifted the envelope and placed it on the hardwood surface in front of Dalton. Even the receptionist's water seemed to listen. What is that? Meredith asked, voice soft, teeth sharp. An instrument executed by Ms. Mallory 2 months ago, a codicil to her will, witnessed by her neighbor of 30 years and her former nurse before she entered hospice, self-proving affidavit attached, original notarized. I have the original. This is an attorney's certified copy. The original is in a safe deposit box at State Street Bank. Graham made a sound like a chair dragged across tile. You forged? Finish that sentence, and we can go downstairs together and meet the detective who will take your statement. It wasn't a bluff. In my bag was a file with chain of custody documents and a text from a friend at the district attorney's office that read simply, "If they push, push back. I've got you."
Helena typed all of it with the even mercy of a good stenographer who understands that people are instruments trying to tune themselves. "For the record," I said, "I appreciate the admission. For the record, too, the Codicil's trust gives you what you needed without stealing what she intended." Graham shifted, chair scowling again. "And me? You get paintings to sell and an equal share of proceeds with the grandchildren," I said. "More than enough to keep whatever weather you like over your head." Trevor lifted his chin, trying on maturity the way teenagers try on hats. "I just want no one to be mad at me." "That's not a legal remedy," Jonah murmured. Dalton exhaled. "We'll see you Tuesday," he said. "Between now and then, we will not initiate any transfers." "Nor will we," Jonah said. "Before we adjourn," I said, because I had carried one more thing all day and I didn't want to take it home unopened, "I want to read a letter into the record." I lifted the thick paper with my grandmother's hand on it, the ink a little shaky at the downstrokes, sure at the up. My hand shook in counterpoint, dated the same day as the codicil. Dalton frowned. "A letter is hearsay for most purposes." "Then let it be song," I said, and opened it. "I'm reading it anyway." Helena's fingers softened, ready for someone else's cadence. "Darling Tamsin," it began, and the courtroom inside the conference room got bigger because love does that. "If you are reading this, it means you took the pen when I asked. Thank you. I have spent a life watching men explain my sentences to me, and I'm tired. Here is what I want when I am no longer here to lean on the doorframe and interrupt you. I want that house to remain a place where someone who is afraid of the dark can sleep with the windows open until she isn't afraid anymore. I want girls with salt under their nails and no map in their pocket to feel wind and canvas and learn what a keel is. I want you to keep your verbs strong. When people come after dark with papers, turn on the lamp." I stopped, not because there was more, but because the more was exactly what it needed to be. I folded the paper. Meredith's face had gone through 3 seasons while I read. Graham's had at least admitted there might be weather other than his own. Dalton's had moved not at all, and in that stillness, confessed. "For the record," I said once more, quieter now, "we will see you Tuesday." We adjourned. People stood, not all at once, the way a flock doesn't. Helena packed. Inez hugged me in the hallway with that careful, bracing kind of hug nurses learn at work. "If I lose the job, I'll find another," I said into my hair. "You're not going to lose it." And even if I was wrong, the sentence needed to exist. Jonah checked the time. We should get the instrument to the clerk, then go home. Home was a studio with a ficus that couldn't make up its mind. Before I went there, I detoured to the river. The Charles flickered its unsentimental grace. I sat on the steps by the boathouse and watched a girl in a borrowed life jacket push off too hard and nearly tip, and then, because bodies learn faster than minds when water is immediate, right herself and find the pull that turns effort into movement. My phone buzzed. Abby. "Good day's work. Tuesday, we sharpen. Proud of you." Another buzz. Helena. A text I didn't expect from a person who deals in transcripts, not sentiment. "When you said air with memory, I wrote that down. That's what this is." She added a picture, the cover sheet of the transcript with the title in formal letters, "In Re Estate of Mallory on the Record Family Meeting."
Under it, the timestamps like street numbers on a road I had walked. I walked home in the late light, Boston doing its summer trick of making even alleys look like they could lead to clemency. Inside, I placed the jade ring in my palm. It wormed fast, as if relieved to be where it had always belonged. I laid Grandma's letter beside it. The ficus dropped a leaf in what could have been protest and what could have been growth. The next hours were not cinematic. They were exactly the kind of administrivia that keeps a life from listing: scanning, emailing, acknowledging, confirming. Jonah sent a draft of the joint letter to the court regarding Tuesday's hearing. Dalton replied with edits that were surprisingly clean. Meredith texted me a single sentence: "I will tell the truth Tuesday." I typed back, "Thank you." I didn't add anything else because sometimes verbs alone are brave enough. As dusk draped the city in the honest color that comes when the day stops pretending, I walked to the small bakery that still sold lemon cake by the slice and bought one. I carried it to the tiny patch of community garden I tended behind my building and set it on the low stone, lightning bugs faking stars around me. I broke off a bite and ate it there, alone with a woman's voice in my head saying, "Make sure the verbs do the work, darling." My phone lit, again, one last time, with an email from Dalton. "Miss Wells, attached. Please find a draft stipulation regarding interim trustee for the charitable entities. If acceptable, we can file first thing in the morning." I read it twice. It named an independent fiduciary with a resume that smelled like salt and numbers. It suspended Meredith's authority without humiliating her by name. It quoted, of all things, charitable intent. I typed, "Acceptable. File." Then I set the phone face down and heard the city breathe. Tuesday would still come with arguments and exhibits and a question about whether shame makes people into villains or simply humans with their fear turned inside. Today, I had walked into a room with a machine, a codicil, and a nurse with courage and asked the record to wear a robe. Today, that had been enough. I washed my plate. I set the ring on the sill where the last of the light could find it and make it sea green again. I stood there while the night explained itself without my help. When I finally lay down, the ceiling fan still made its patient circles, the same way probate grinds, the same way promises do when you keep them. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.
Yes. Did anyone tell you what the visit was for? They said prayers. She glanced at Meredith just once, the way you glance toward Dunder even if the lightning has already ended. Describe Miss Mallory's condition immediately after the 9:30 medication. She was warm, drowsy. She liked to hold the blanket close. Her words were slow. She smiled when I fixed the pillow. Did anyone place a pen in her hand? Yes. Did you advise waiting? Yes. I stepped out to notify my supervisor. Inez's eyes found Caro like a compass finding north. When I returned, the pages had signatures. "Who was in the room?" Jonah asked. She hesitated long enough to tell the truth how it really arrives, reluctant only because it knows the cost. "Miss Caldwell," she said, "and a man I didn't know." Dalton rose. "Objection, Your Honor, to identification without foundation." Crane lifted her hand. "Overruled as to the witness describing who she saw. Mr. Dalton, you may cross on detail." Jonah continued through the log entries and the dose schedule, each column a small, unassailable fact. He introduced the affidavit. He sat. Dalton stood for cross-examination with a little more smoothness than the moment deserved. "Miss Alvarez, you care about your patients?" "Yes." "And you care for your job?" "Yes." "Would you agree medication affects each patient differently?" "Yes." "Would you agree you are not a physician qualified to opine on testamentary capacity?" Caro shifted like a mountain, thinking about moving. Inez said, "I agree I am not a physician. I am qualified to tell you when someone is very sleepy and when she is not." Dalton paused. "No further questions."
Jonah called the attending physician next. Dr. Leland had the kind of voice that never forgot how to be kind while telling very difficult truths. He explained dosing intervals, half-life, and what alertness looks like in the first and second hour after a morphine administration. He had notably not been present at 9:30. Would you expect a patient to be at peak sedation within that first hour? Jonah asked. Yes. Would you, as a matter of medical prudence, defer any legally significant execution until outside that window? Yes. Dalton's tried differentiation, hypotheticals. Dr. Leland refused to abandon the shoreline of what he knew. He said, "It is not my role to judge intentions. It is my role to protect clarity when clarity is fragile." The video played next, a coda to all the voices in the room that somehow raised them, not outshouted them. My grandmother and her blue sweater said her name, her intent, the sentence about morning and night and choice. The small screen turned the courtroom into a porch, with lemon cake cooling invisibly just out of frame. I felt Meredith's breath change, beside me. It became human in a way resentment cannot sustain. "Anything further?" Judge Crane asked. Jonas did. "Yes, Your Honor." He presented the bank affidavit documenting the attempted transfer. He offered the TRO. He read a portion of the Codicil stating that any person serving under a power of attorney shall not serve as director of any charitable foundation funded by the estate. The words were straightforward enough to make scheming feel embarrassing in their presence. Dalton replied with what he had. Miss Mallory had long-standing desires for family harmony. She valued Miss Caldwell's stewardship. The timing, though unfortunate, does not itself prove undue influence. He said the sentence like a man who knows a door is closing and wants to leave a tidy footprint on the threshold. Crane leaned forward. "Mr. Dalton, when did your firm assume representation of Miss Mallory?" 2 months ago. "And who initiated that change?" "Miss Caldwell." Crane nodded once. "Counsel, approach." The white noise machine hissed like rain as they conferred. Helena's fingers were still. She recorded the pauses the way she recorded the words, because some silences earn their place in a transcript like landmarks. When the bench conference ended, Crane spoke clearly, for the record and for the room that had lived the last 48 hours like a small country survived a storm. The court finds that the proffered codicil, executed 2 months prior, is facially valid, supported by a self-proving affidavit, and corroborated by video evidence. The court further finds serious questions regarding capacity and undue influence related to the instrument purportedly executed at 9:30 p.m. on the evening prior to death. Accordingly, the court admits the 2014 will with codicil to probate on an interim basis. The 930 instrument is sequestered under seal pending further forensic review. An independent trustee is appointed forthwith to oversee any charitable distributions named to be supplied by the parties within 24 hours or selected by the court. All transfers remain enjoined. A written order will issue. The gavel's single knock was not loud. It didn't have to be. Around us, air adjusted to this new truth. We exhaled as one organism, complicated and messy and human. Meredith's shoulders lowered a fraction, as if the coat she wore were made of stones that had finally remembered they were only fabric. She turned toward me not like an adversary forced to concede, but like a woman who had met the wall of her worst moment and found it could be climbed if someone put a ladder against it. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not to the room, to me. I wanted to feel safe." "I know. And now we can help other girls learn to feel safe in a boat with wind for friend." Helena touched my sleeve as if to remind me the record was still present, curious, alive. "Do you want to say anything more, on or off?" "On. Just this." I turned toward the judge and the scatter of faces that had been the chorus and antagonists of these days. "Thank you for protecting her verbs." Crane's mouth moved in what might once have been a smile before the job taught it to be a straight line. Court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the sun performed its best argument for a good faith belief in mornings. Reporters, 2 of them, waited with that polite, predatory air of people who need quotes for a page. I said no comment, because some words belong to rooms where people swear to tell the truth. Graham muttered something that may have been an apology to no one in particular, and then, in a twist that confused even the pigeons, asked if I wanted to get coffee. "Another day," I said. Trevor looked at his shoes and then at me. "I can help with the scholarship website," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him past the age of 8, I believed him. By noon, Jonah and Dalton had jointly proposed the interim trustee, a woman named Navdeep Ahuja, with credentials that sounded like ballast, decades in nonprofit compliance, a sailing background, a habit of saying no neatly when it needed to be said. Judge Crane signed. The order came through at 12:47 with the clean edges of a paper that understands its job. Caro hugged Ines. "I'll cover your shift while you take a long lunch," she said. "Go breathe." Ines looked at me, at Helena, at the courthouse. "I didn't know telling the truth could make my hands stop shaking," she said. "It's not always like this," Helena told her gently. "Sometimes it makes them shake more, but today the room held." We walked toward the river because that was where the day wanted to end, at least for a chapter. The Charles threw back light like coins returning to pockets. Jonah peeled off with a reminder to answer his emails. Helena received a call about a deposition across town and lifted her bag with a small groan that sounded suspiciously like contentment. "I'll send the draft transcript tonight," she said. "You'll see how 2 days can turn into a book." "I know," I said. "I was in it." Meredith and I kept walking. When we reached the bridge where the wind lifts your hair regardless of whether you want it to, she stopped. "Come to Chatham with me," she said softly. "Not today. Soon. I want to open the windows the way she did and see if the house feels like a house again." "We'll go on a day the tide is right," I said. "We'll bring cake. We'll name the first scholarship recipient there." She nodded and looked at the water like it might answer. "Do you think she forgave me?" "I think she told me to keep your windows open until you weren't afraid. I think forgiveness is a draft that keeps circulating until somebody signs." We announced the scholarship a month later, the way she would have liked. No ribbon cutting, no speeches with more adjectives than nouns, just a page that worked, a picture of the sea taken from the porch, a sentence that said, "For girls who want to learn wind and water and their own names at once." We called it the Greta Mallory Maritime Scholarship, because anything else would have been either coy or wrong. Meredith came to the launch in a linen dress the color of gulls. She didn't wear the pearls. She stood beside me as the site went live and the first application arrived from a 17-year-old in Dorchester who wrote, "I am better at fixing things than naming them. I think boats might teach me both." We read that line 3 times. "This," Meredith said, touching the screen as if it were a child's cheek, "is the will." Helena delivered the bound transcript that afternoon because she is a person who understands the ceremonial uses of paper. The cover sheet had the case caption, the dates, the page range, and beneath, because she insisted, a short dedication in small type. "To the woman who asked us to keep our verbs strong." I put it on the shelf at eye level between cookbooks and casebooks. It looked like it belonged to both. Ines stopped by the office Navdeep had found for us over the boathouse. 2 rooms, 3 chairs, a view that could cure small hurts. She brought lemon bars in a tin that looked like it had baked weddings for decades. "Caro said I should take a victory lap," she said, embarrassed and proud and exactly right. We told her about the first applicant. She told us she'd enrolled in a class at Bunker Hill, nursing leadership, because telling the truth sometimes rearranges a life, and you might as well see where the furniture fits best. September brought a wind that made you believe in punctuation again. We drove to Chatham in a car that smelled of coffee and new pages. The house waited with the patience of old, shingled things that have learned the art of standing still in all weather. Meredith unlocked the door and then stood back, the gesture half invitation, half apology. We opened windows. Low tide smelled like memory that didn't ask permission. In the bedroom, on the dresser that had held generations of brushes and rings, the sun made a square on the wood. Meredith touched it the way a person touches a scar that has turned into a story. I told her once that I didn't understand why she loved the sea if it forgave nothing. And what did she say? That forgiveness isn't the sea's job, Meredith said and smiled a little. It's ours.
We sat on the porch with lemon cake and the codicil in a folder between us like a family Bible. I read a paragraph aloud, not because I needed the words, but because words want air. The part about the house as a place to sleep with windows open until fear learns to wear itself out. The part about girls and keels. The verbs did their work again. We named the first recipient there, together. Her name was Lila. She had never been in a boat smaller than a ferry. She had hands that knew how to take apart a bicycle and put it back together so it didn't squeak. We called her. When she answered, we put the phone on speaker, and the sound of her joy walked across the porch like a breeze. After we hung up, Meredith cried quietly into a paper napkin and then laughed the laugh you laugh when a hard thing finally moves. She said suddenly, startling herself with the courage of the offer, "I'll be a trustee. Not for the foundation. Navdeep can have that forever. For the scholarship. I'll make snacks. I'll write notes. I'll learn how to read applications like you do, looking for the verbs." "Done," I said, because people become their best selves when someone hands them a job with edges. We sailed that afternoon in a borrowed boat with a sail like a shirt that had known many shoulders. Meredith held the tiller once and laughed that shocked laugh again when the boat obeyed her hand. The wind filled, the canvas spoke its fabric language, and the small, obedient miracle of movement happened, effort becoming glide. I heard Grandma in my head, "There it is. That is how you know what you want has a name that isn't fever." When we tacked back toward shore, the house looked like a house, not a battlefield. It wore its windows open without flinching. Meredith let the tiller go and caught it again like a parent letting a child run 2 steps further each time. "I wish I'd done this sooner," she said. "You did it now. That counts." We took the train back that evening, sun loading gold into the marsh grass. My phone buzzed with an email from Judge Crane's clerk attaching the final written order. Codicil admitted, night instrument invalidated for lack of capacity and undue influence. Charitable intent safeguarded. The language was precise and almost tender in its insistence that words mean what they promise to mean. I forwarded it to Jonah, to Abby, to Navdeep with a note, "Thank you for making air remember." Helena replied almost immediately with a photo of her steno machine at rest, the keys like closed petals. "It remembers you, too," she wrote. At home, I placed the order beside the transcript and the letter. The ficus had decided, for now, to live. The ceiling fan drew its circles, the city threw its noise into the air and trusted gravity to sort it out. I held the ring in my palm and thought about verbs. Freeze, admit, appoint, enjoin, forgive. I thought about hands, the way Ines used hers to steady a pillow, the way Helena used hers to trap syllables, the way Meredith had used hers to sign something she shouldn't, and then to open windows she should have opened sooner. I thought about mine, ink stained from notes and cake sticky from afternoons that insisted on being sweet, even when the morning had been anything but. I didn't talk to the camera that night. I didn't make a speech. I wrote a note to Lila instead. 3 sentences she could fold into a pocket. When you're afraid, name the wind. When you're lost, do the next honest thing. When you're done, leave the windows open for the girl who comes after you. And then, because this story had always been made of letters and rooms and the exacting mercy of records, I opened the transcript again and read the last line Helena had typed at the end of that first day, when we didn't know yet of how the next page would turn. Objection. The dash still lifted like a bridge. I wrote beneath it in pencil, "Noted. Overruled by time." In the morning, we would take Lila to the boathouse. In a week, Navdeep would send her first patient email asking for receipts and promising a hoodie if she turned them in on time. In the winter, we would meet a second girl who could weld like a poet. In 10 years, I don't know what the house will be or how many windows it will own, but I know this. The verbs will still be working, quiet and relentless, shaping lives like water shapes stone without needing to call itself relentless. For now, the night put its cool hand on the glass again. I turned off the lamp, left the windows open, and let the city teach the air my name. The way the boat had. Not a shout, just a set of small repeated acts that add up to a direction.
2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I said it out loud to the empty kitchen like a benediction I didn't know I believed in, set the phone face down again, and stood there with the plate balanced on my palm, the jade ring on the sill, and the city breathing past my window. Night pressed its cool hand against the glass. I washed the dish, dried it, then reached for the ring and let it warm against my skin. The fan kept tracing its calm circles overhead, and the apartment, so small it could almost be measured in careful steps, felt as wide as a hallway between one life and another. I slept for 2 hours and 26 minutes, woke to the soft urgency of a message from Jonah, draft delivered, clerk confirmed receipt. See you at 9 by the courthouse steps. And to a second, quieter note from Meredith at 3:17 a.m. I will not run. I will sit and listen. I lay there with the rectangle of light on the ceiling where the street lamp found a window seam, and I whispered a single word into the dark. Tuesday. Morning came like a well-behaved witness, on time, organized, refusing to embellish. I showered, braided my hair the way Grandma liked when we sailed, and chose the navy dress that felt like a decision I could wear. The ring slid along its thin chain against my collarbone and settled where breath lives. By 8:30, I was on the sidewalk walking toward New Chardon with the portfolio under my arm and the kind of focus that makes city noise into percussion. Abby texted, "Judge has a full docket. We're likely first up. Bring Helena." I smiled because of course I would bring Helena. Truth had liked the way her keys sounded and wanted an encore. Helena met me at the courthouse steps with a canvas bag slung crossbody and the portable battery in it like a heart that could be swapped out if necessary. "Good morning," she said, "like a verdict you can trust." "Good morning," I said back. "Ready to catch air with memory?" She smiled, small and entirely real. I thought about that line all night. Some days, this job feels like trying to hold on to water with your hands. Yesterday reminded me, if you shape your hands right, you can carry a lot. Inside, the line at security moved with the resigned choreography of people who have learned that small inconveniences are the price of larger safety. Abby texted, "Judge has a full docket. We're likely first up. Bring Helena." I smiled because of course I would bring Helena. Truth had liked the way her key sounded and wanted an encore. Helena met me at the courthouse steps with a canvas bag slung crossbody and the portable battery in it like a heart that could be swapped out if necessary. "Good morning," she said, like a verdict you can trust. "Good morning," I said back. "Ready to catch air with memory?" She smiled, small and entirely real. I thought about that line all night. Some days, this job feels like trying to hold on to water with your hands. Yesterday reminded me, if you shape your hands right, you can carry a lot. Inside, the line at security moved with the resigned choreography of people who have learned that small inconveniences are the price of larger safety. Meredith stood 20 feet away in a charcoal coat despite July because some people armor with fabric. Graham whispered into his phone, then pretended he wasn't. Trevor looked at the high ceiling and said nothing. Inez arrived in the company of a woman whose posture said supervisor and whose eyes said human being. When Inez saw me, she lifted her hand in a tiny wave like a person afraid of making a sound on a pond. "Thank you for coming," I said when we reached one another. The supervisor introduced herself as Caro. She had the calm of a person who has walked patients through the end and knows how to count breaths without counting down hope. "We received the judge's letter," Caro said. "No retaliation. Noted." She glanced at Helena's bag and smiled. "My mother was a court reporter. I grew up falling asleep to key chatter. You're in good hands." We took our seats on the worn wooden bench outside courtroom 2. The hallway smelled faintly of varnish and coffee. Jonah arrived at 8:54, tie straight, eyes clear, a stack of exhibits labeled with tabs that looked like a city skyline. He sat beside me, leaned in. "We'll lead with capacity and the video, then the hospice log, then the attempted transfer. If Dalton fights sequence, I'll remind the court that time moves forward." "Thank you," I said, "for everything." He shrugged like a man who knows gratitude is nice and verbs are better. "Let's go make the record." At 9, the clerk stood at the door. "In Ray is State of Mallory," she called, and the gear of the day engaged. We filed in. Judge Crane took the bench with the same face as yesterday, weathered by other people's weather, and somehow still its own forecast. "Counsel," she said. "Jonah, ready for the petitioner, Your Honor." "Dalton, ready for the respondent. Proceed."
Jonas stood and set the rhythm like a drummer who knows exactly where the downbeat goes. Your Honor, this is an evidentiary hearing regarding an instrument executed at 9:30 p.m. the night before decedent's passing and a codicil executed 2 months prior. We call Inez Alvarez. Inez looked at Caro. Caro touched Inez's elbow, and I'm here pressed into skin. Inez walked to the witness chair with the measured steps of someone crossing a stream on stones. She took the oath, voice trembling on the first syllable, and steady on the last. Jonah's questions were simple because simple questions let truth walk on its own legs. Where do you work? Evergreen Hospice. Were you present the night of July 17th for Ms. Mallory's 9:30 p.m. medication? Yes. Did visitors come that evening?